It is a compelling and provocative narrative you've presented, one that taps into a significant undercurrent of real-world challenges and shifting political and technological sands. As a response, it's powerful rhetoric, as a comprehensive analysis of our mobility future. However, it presents a selective and polemical viewpoint that requires a more nuanced examination. Let's deconstruct this diesel renaissance argument, separating the valid observations from the hyperbolic conclusions. Your central thesis that the forced singular march toward an all-electric future has hit a wall of reality contains substantial truth. The winter of 2025 did see a critical recalibration in Europe, faced with voter pushback, grid limitations, a struggling charging infrastructure rollout, and the strategic horror of trading energy dependence on Russia for battery dependence on China. The EU's ban was indeed reframed. The final legislation for 2035 permits the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles only if they run exclusively on carbon-neutral fuels. This was not a total surrender to common sense, but a hard-fought political compromise, primarily championed by Germany, to protect a core industry and acknowledge the role of synthetic fuels, or e-fuels, in hard-to-electrify sectors like aviation and heavy machinery. This shift validated the position long held by Toyota, Stellantis, and Porsche that a technology-agnostic approach to carbon reduction is superior to a de facto electric vehicle mandate. It acknowledged that the well-to-wheel emissions of an EV charged on a coal grid can rival those of a hybrid, and that the massive embedded carbon in battery production is a legitimate part of the equation. The narrative of an electric utopia was indeed oversold, ignoring physics, economics, and human behavior. Your points on grid strain, the real-world limitations of current EVs for towing and long-range travel in extreme conditions, and the ethical quagmire of certain mineral supply chains are not fringe concerns. They are central to serious engineering and policy debates. Here is where your analysis shines in its technical detail, but begins to blur the lines between a promising solution and a universal savior. While hydrotreated vegetable oil, or HVO, is often presented as a seamless and potent drop-in solution for decarbonizing diesel transport, a critical examination reveals significant constraints that fundamentally challenge its scalability and environmental credentials. First and foremost is the issue of feedstock limitation. HVO's primary virtue as a sustainable fuel is derived from its use of waste and residue streams, such as used cooking oil and animal tallow. However, the global supply of these feedstocks is inherently finite and already heavily utilized by existing biofuel markets and other industries. Scaling HVO production to replace even a modest fraction of the world's vast fossil diesel demand is therefore physically impossible within this sustainable waste-based model. Either compete for virgin vegetable oils, thereby displacing food crops and reigniting the food versus fuel debates that plagued first-generation biofuels, or rely on speculative future sources like algae oils, which are not commercially viable or proven at the necessary scale. This core limitation means HVO, for all its technical merits, is destined to remain a niche fuel rather than a broad market replacement. Furthermore, the marketing of HVO frequently veers into hyperbole, particularly regarding its effect on engines. It is often portrayed as a clean agent that can miraculously dissolve pre-existing deposits and dramatically extend engine life. In reality, while HVO does burn cleaner due to its high cetane number and absence of aromatics, leading to reduced particulate matter and nitrogen oxide emissions in modern engines, it is not an engine elixir. It cannot purge an engine of sludge accumulated from years of conventional diesel use, nor does it eliminate standard maintenance requirements. It is an excellent, stable fuel with superior combustion properties, but its benefits are operational and environmental, not mechanical restoration. This overstatement risks creating unrealistic user expectations and distracts from the fuel's genuine, yet bounded advantages. Finally, the life cycle analysis presented in favor of HVO often relies on strategically narrow comparisons to maximize its apparent benefit. A common assertion is that a legacy diesel vehicle running on HVO can have a lower total life cycle carbon footprint than a large electric vehicle charged on a coal-heavy grid. While this may be mathematically true in a specific fossil fuel-dependent grid scenario, it is a misleading benchmark. The energy landscape is rapidly evolving, and a more pertinent comparison would be against an EV charged on an increasingly common renewable heavy grid, where the EV's operational emissions plummet. In such a fair and forward-looking comparison, the advantage flips dramatically in favor of electrification. Moreover, the carbon advantage of HVO is precarious and entirely contingent on its waste-based feedstock. Its life cycle emissions are not zero, they are offset by the avoided waste processing emissions. If market demand pushes production beyond the sustainable waste stream, as scalability would require, and encroaches on crop-based oils, its carbon footprint balloons, potentially rivaling or even exceeding that of the fossil fuel it aims to replace. Thus, HVO's environmental promise is conditional and fragile, hinging on a strict adherence to limited feedstocks that preclude the very scale needed for systemic change. Portraying Akio Toyoda as a lone, ridiculed visionary now vindicated as compelling drama but incomplete history, Toyota's multi-pathway strategy was indeed wise, but it came at a cost. It left them playing catch-up in the pure EV space, a market segment that, despite its woes, has grown exponentially and continues to define consumer innovation perception. The Hilux and Land Cruiser are legendary for durability, but they serve a specific, rugged use case. They are not templates for the global passenger car fleet, most of which are urban commuters where a modern EV's characteristics, low noise, instant torque, home charging, are ideal. Similarly, Stellantis's massive reinvestment in internal combustion engines is not a rejection of electrification but a hedging of bets, a belt and suspender strategy for a group heavily exposed to the North American truck and commercial vehicle markets where electrification faces its toughest hurdles. It is prudent business, not a moral victory for piston engines. So, here's the core flaw in the argument: it frames the future as a binary war, piston versus battery, where supposedly one must triumphantly defeat the other. But honestly, that's a nostalgic, not a futuristic viewpoint. The real story of 2026 isn't some diesel renaissance, but rather the dawn of strategic diversification. The market is, well, fragmenting into optimized solutions. For urban mobility, it's dominated by battery electric vehicles and smaller, affordable hybrids. In these cases, range and charging speed just don't matter as much. Now, for long-distance and high-utilization vehicles like trucks and taxis, there's a fierce battleground between hydrogen fuel cells, HVO or renewable diesel, and even the emerging, if still delayed, solid-state EV. When it comes to performance and enthusiast drivers, we're seeing a split between high-performance EVs and synthetic fuel-compatible internal combustion vehicles, with the latter becoming more of a niche, premium experience. And for heavy-duty and off-grid applications, high-efficiency diesel hybrids running on HVO or e-diesel will probably reign for decades, just as you pointed out. This isn't a comeback, it's simply these engines holding on to their enduring domain. The electric vehicle monopoly that some zealots predicted is, in fact, over, the so-called asteroid missed. However, the internal combustion engine hasn't, evolved into something far more powerful in a general sense. Instead, it's fighting for its specialized life by becoming radically more efficient and adaptable to carbon-neutral fuels. The 2035 compromise didn't end the war on the piston, it gave it a conditional pardon and a new mission to prove it can exist in a carbon-constrained world without dragging fossil carbon from the ground. HVO is a brilliant tactical victory in that mission, but let's be honest, it's supply-constrained. The ultimate hope for the piston's long-term survival in passenger cars lies with synthetic e-fuels, made from captured CO2 and green hydrogen, which right now are still energy-intensive and prohibitively expensive. The roar we hear in 2026 isn't the triumphant return of a lone king. Instead, it's the complex, discordant and honestly thrilling symphony of multiple technologies finally being allowed to compete on a truly level playing field, judged not by dogma, but by real-world efficiency, total life cycle emissions, and the diverse needs of a global population. The internal combustion engine, especially in its diesel form, has secured its rightful place in that orchestra for the foreseeable future. But, to declare it the reconquering maestro is to misread the score entirely.